to support this program. So at this point, I guess I get the honor to introduce you to everybody for this session. And with that, I'm got the next speaker is going to be Barry Bird. He's a professor of mathematics and computer science at Good University. He had put together many several books together. And at this moment, he's going to tell us what's the best way to do something in writing a computer books. And that, Barry, I bring it to you.
All right. I probably won't tell you things as much as answer your questions. And I may not give you the best advice because who knows, right? This is an art, not a science. But just a little bit of background. I've written about 12 books, and some of them are in many editions. For instance, Java for Dummies is coming out in a week or two, and it's in its 8th edition now. So if you add up all the editions and all the books, it comes to about 22 go-arounds, 23, 24, something like that. I've written a couple books that never saw the light of day. Most of my books are in the For Dummies series, but I also wrote a very large Pascal textbook in the 80s and a fairly serious Java server pages book and a couple of other things that we're venturing out of the Dummies series, outside of the Dummies series. And I've got a couple of proposals now that are not in the Dummies series. So I have experience doing this, ranging over about 30 years, no, more than that. Ooh, my first Pascal proposal was in 1987-ish. So yeah, a long time. And I think what we should do here is have an informal discussion. I have some tips and tricks, but I'd really rather find out what you already know and don't know and want to know. So this is a list of topics about which I have slides. I'm not going to read them to you because that would be boring. So if you have any favorites there, you can kind of note it and ask me about it as we march on. First thing I want to do before we get started is to find out who you are. And I apologize, I realized just before this presentation started that the next slide is obsolete. And I will, because it comes from presentations that I do presentations of like this once in a while, and this is my standard slide set, and I did not want to remove the obsolete note on the next slide. So let's see if you can catch it. Yeah, it's that last one. Who's here for the refreshments? In the virtual world, if you want refreshments, you're in the wrong place. We're not meeting. And there we go. Good for you, Lou. So let me take the temperature of the crowd, so to speak, and ask, written a book, written other things, who's aspiring to be writing things, who's a good writer, who's not a good writer. Let's just chat for a bit.
Well, I'll start. I've written 3 books, all technical books, and I'm starting out another. And what I find a little frustrating is making a choice of what tools to use to do my writing in. There are many more choices now than were previously, and I'm still struggling with this, trying to figure out what makes the best tool. I am kind of fond of using LaTeX, and there's something called Share LaTeX, also called Overleaf. But even narrowing it down to LaTeX, there are so many templates, and it's not at all clear to me if I'm headed in the right direction or I should try a different tool.
Okay. And what books have you written? What are the technical topics that you've covered?
Well, I wrote a book on C. I wrote a book on Unix. I wrote a book on some software I had written. And the software I used to use was FrameMaker, which was
That
really,
still exist?
no, it was purchased by Adobe and they killed it.
It killed it? Okay, because that was one of the very early efforts that I had, was to write a book is using FrameMaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the early WYSIWYG writing, authoring platforms. And yeah, I would be very happy to find something similar to that.
It's a very far cry from LaTeX.
That's true.
Okay, so you've got experience. Who else? Others who just chime in and answer any or all of these questions. And Frank, what do we got?
My book.
Oh, hold it up. Let's see.
Shameless plug.
Apollo Guidance Computer. Oh, cool.
And that's about 12 years old, 13 years old. And boy, did I learn a lot about the writing process.
Like, what did you learn?
Again?
What did you learn? What are your remaining thoughts?
Key, big number one, because I'm in the middle of writing a second book. Understand, please, the amount of work you're going to be putting in. Specifically, it took me 3 years to write, and it was a panic rush every day to bang out material.
Yeah.
You know, I'm way, I won't talk, it's embarrassing to talk about how late I am on a second book on engineering. But really, it is almost better, in my perspective, that you have the book mostly written before you start going out shopping it. The idea of the sample chapter and such, that sounds real good. You can bang it out, you can polish, you can whatever, but then you have the other 95%, which is going to take a heck of a lot longer than you did for your sample chapter.
But then when you write 90% of the book before you start shopping it around, there's the danger, isn't there, that you've done all that work and it doesn't get picked up? That would be my fear.
Oh, yeah, well, that's life.
Okay.
And I'm lucky that both this book was actually, I was asked to write it, and that's too much of a funny story, but no, I was demanded to write it by one of the editors of the imprint, Springer, and honestly, oops, something's beeping.
That might be me, yeah.
No matter, but honestly, the amount of work and just life gets in the way.
Oh, yeah.
We won't go into my situation, but everyone has the same, the scale of trials and tribulations. The idea of having, say, 3/4 of it written behind you is a huge advantage, because I was working a 60-hour week and then trying to bang out a couple hundred words a day. And that is a lot more effort than it sounds.
Yeah.
And for me, writing is a painfully slow process, and a large part of it's that.
I agree. It is for me also. I have never done that, written the book first and then shopped it around. So I don't have experience with that end of it. I don't know. You have experience with Springer, and I have questions about Springer that I'd like to ask you offline.
Oh, fine. If you want, I'll send you a private chat with my email, or we can set up a Zoom or whatever you'd like.
Well, my email, I think, hold on. My email is on the slides. If you just send me an email, then.
Oh, all right, sure, fine.
Because I have, right, but we don't want to exchange.
Yeah, let's not bog down here. I apologize for monopolizing.
Well, no, it's not a question of bogging down. It's just a question of, you don't want to publicly, talk about a particular publisher.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't mind, because I had nothing but outstanding experience.
Okay, all right. We'll talk. Who else? Where is everybody else?
Good comments. I remember once reading about Thomas Edison. He invented some sort of an electronic gizmo. I think it was his harmonic telegraph, and he shopped it around and nobody wanted to buy it. And his conclusion was he wasn't going to invent anything again and waste the effort unless he knew there was a market for it. Now, I know on the second slide that you showed asking if we wanted to discuss any of these bulleted items was the proposal. Could you amplify that a little bit? Yes, that's the slides there. What would be a good proposal? How much effort should you put into a proposal to take out and present it, realizing that it may not be accepted? Every publisher or every person you wanted to work with might think it's a dumb idea and didn't want to get involved with it. And you know, I don't want to do as Frank suggested, be stuck with a lot of work that nobody wants.
Yeah, let me toss in some thoughts. I have a slide. I think I can click on the slide, but honestly, it's probably better if, well, hold on. I guess how much proposal you write depends on how well you're already known to the market to begin with. The first proposal that I wrote was as detailed as it could possibly be. After I became known, particularly to a publisher, my proposals were just, hey, Joe, should I write a book about something? Sure, let's see a table of contents, we'll do it. But what I think is the standard now is that each publisher has a template for their proposal, their own template for the proposal, and it has certain questions. Summarize the idea for the book. Why is this book different from books that are on the market? What kinds of other books are on the market and how are they selling? Give me a detailed table of contents. Tell me how you plan to market the book. Tell me what platform you already have in this arena so that you can grab readers immediately who know your name. They have all these questions and they want you to follow that format and answer each of these questions. So those questions will be a little bit different for each publisher. So if you have a particular publisher in mind, the idea is to find out what their questions are. Maybe they even have a standard form that you fill out, and go ahead and fill out the form for that particular publisher. If you don't have a publisher in mind, then you collect a bunch of these forms and figure out what the commonalities are and answer those questions in your own free-form document. And of course, get other people to review it before you send it out, because, you know.
Do you have to guess how long it's going to take you? And Frank, you're talking about multiple years. And that surprises me, because in technology, how is what you're writing not already obsolete by the time it surfaces? I don't follow that. Like, do you have to continually change it up to the last minute, or how does that work time-wise?
I have a million things to say about that, but I'm going to defer to others first.
Well, in my case, remember, I'm talking about a historical computer, so the technology didn't change that much. However, during the writing process, I'm constantly getting huge amounts of input from other people, which would have been probably supplied by the reviewers. Again, Springer has a review process. It gets sent out, your manuscripts get sent out, and it gets cut and sliced and diced. So it is under continual revision. And the idea, and again, when I say write it in advance, is that you're already in the mode for, slash, hack, burn, and, all the rest, when a particular section or a chapter just simply doesn't work, or it works so well it needs to be expanded on. Again, remember, I was working, a 1,000,000-hour-a-week job. As far as the time, you can never, ever predict, oh my God, there's a life crisis, there's a divorce, there's fill in the blank. It's going to all get in the way. And so I would much rather have a a situation where I have something to present rather than having to frantically go and scramble and come out with a subpar thing. Now, in something where there's evolving technologies, such as, oh, someone came up with, iOS, fill in the blank, and you need to update, you need to write something about the latest version. Yeah, that gets to be a bit of a tough problem. And that's when you have to pull down the shades, tell everyone to go away and just bury yourself in it. And that may not be feasible for many folk.
But even then, I wrote a Ruby on Rails book, and it was obsolete a month after it came out.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. Well, I didn't expect them to make that radical a set of changes. I was used to the Java world where there's such a well-ordered sequence of changes. I've written 14 editions of Java books, and one small program stopped working from one edition to the next. One program, only one transition. But that's Java. With Ruby on Rails, it was, well, let's tear down the whole house and put the house back together for the next version. And unfortunately, it landed just a month after my book came out. Nothing you can do about that except warn the reader and post a lot of stuff on your website, I guess. This is how you fix this, and this is how you fix that.
I just want to support Frank's experience. I think you can draw a sharp divide between what I would call passion projects versus works for hire. And I consider Dummies Guides or Idiots Guides works for hire. It's something that you have to come to agreement with from the publisher very early on, versus passion projects where it's kind of irrelevant whether there is going to be a market for your book. It's just something you have to do to satisfy your own urges. And of course, it would be nice if other people benefited from it. But these days, you don't need a traditional publisher. You can self-publish very easily. So if it's a passion type of thing that's driving you to think about writing a book, I wouldn't worry about dealing with a publisher. My experience is very similar to Frank's. I wrote most of my books before ever contacting a publisher, and I didn't worry about their response. I think the very first book I wrote with a co-author, and after a year of working on it, we did decide, okay, this is time to speak to a publisher, and the publisher sent us a contract, and I think we turned the final version in 2 years late. And, the publisher didn't care. The publisher was quite happy because the content of the book was fine and still timely. We kept it updated, and it worked out.
Yeah, so my experiences are both different and varied. First thing is, I write Dummies books, and they're passion projects for me.
Really?
I love writing them. And one of the reasons I love writing them is because I have a very, very scattered mind. And when I think of something goofy, being able to write it in the book is just fun for me. So I really enjoy these projects. I mean, Wiley, when I write a Dummies book, I'm amazed at the kind of silliness that I'm able to put in there. I put in stories about my life, some of them true, some of them made up. It's great. But anyway, you don't want to hear about Dummies books. I've never taken the approach where I write the book first. Maybe it's something I should do, but I've just never done it. My first book took 7 years to write. My third book took 7 weeks. It's not that I was so good at it by the 7-week time. It's just that I had taught that particular material so much and so often that I knew all the explanations that I wanted to pour into the book. I could recite them in my sleep. I have frequently been late on deadlines. The publishers want their books written yesterday. I always try to negotiate that. I never end up negotiating it correctly because I'm too squeamish to say, look, it'll be done when it's done. They of course hate that. So I say, yeah, okay, I'll get it done by such and such. And I'm often either a little bit late or a lot late. When I'm a little bit late, they don't seem to mind. I had one experience where when I was a lot late, they got really upset, but we worked it out. I wish that I could attend a session like this on how to create excuses for being late to a publisher. I feel like I've made an art of it, but I still don't feel as if I can do it properly. As far as keeping your material up to date, the one hint that I have is that if there's any place in a book where you can not commit about how a certain thing is going to go, then you can take advantage of that. So the first couple of chapters of one of my books may start out with, visit this website, click this button, download this. When you download it, unzip that. And all those details are likely to change between the time you've written it and the time the reader reads it. So I sort of give generic instructions saying, search for such and such on the web instead of visit this URL that might be out of date. And once you're on that website, look for a page that says download. If I can possibly be vague about things that might change between writing and reading by a reader, I do that. And then I put notes on my website, which I'm very bad at keeping up to date, but I do it. Time management, the only thing I can do sometimes is just put it in my mind that I'm going to shove all the little tasks aside. They're going to come second, and I'm going to write. Does it work? I don't know. But it does, and by the way, we're talking about the amount of time that it takes to write a book. After you're done, it's still a time-consuming process. You know, you feel like you put a book to bed by writing the manuscript. Books have insomnia. After the book has been submitted, they send you materials to review, and depending on your tolerance for proofreading, that can either be a delight or an awful chore, but it does take time. One of the things I'm facing right now is that I have a Java book coming out a week from now, and I don't have all the materials on the website, my website, prepared yet. So that's another bunch of hours that I have to face in terms of work after the book is supposedly done, written. It sounds like this crowd isn't as conscious of marketing as some authors typically are. I'm not conscious of marketing, but I'll tell you that one of the things that I hear all the time from authors is that they feel like they have to devote as much time to marketing their book after the book is published as they did to write the book before the book was published. I hear complaints all over the place about the publishers not doing enough marketing for people's books. So if that's a concern to you, then that's something to think about in terms of time sinks. Questions, comments? any of these topics that we should be discussing?
Well, I didn't hear an answer to what writing platforms people are using.
Oh yeah, actually, the dummy series says, here's my template for Word, Microsoft Word. Use that template, use those paragraph styles.
So they require you to use Word.
So I have to use Word when I'm doing dummies, and I'm used to it. You know, it's not politically correct to say that you use a Microsoft product for such things, but I've come to feel comfortable enough with it. I don't particularly worry about formatting issues. I let the editor worry about those. So basically, in my books, there's text and there's code, and that's really what I care about. I've tried LaTeX. I can see why it's wonderful, but I'm just not as comfortable with it.
So for your non-dummies books, you are also using Word?
I haven't written a non-dummies book for a while, except actually I did. How quickly I forget. Yeah, I used Word. I was writing with a co-author, and so we bounced around what to use a long time, and Word seemed to be a decent default. Again, you know, I know that it's not, techies are not going to like the idea of using Word, but what features of a platform are most important to you? What features are you missing in Word or in LaTeX?
Well, I will say that I really find much of the user interface of Word to be frustrating. It's heavily modal. You have to do multiple clicks to get into various menus and submenus to change one thing. I would prefer that all of these modal windows can be left open. And I don't know if Word's changed, but it's been a couple of years since I used it for anything complex, but I would be really surprised because that whole modal thing seemed to be baked into the design.
Yeah, it hasn't changed that much. What you're talking about is still baked in. Yeah, so what other platforms have you tried that either are satisfy or don't?
Well, like I said, my experience with other books was with FrameMaker. I've written a lot of papers with LaTeX tools, and of course, you're much more in control of your environment in LaTeX. So that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Just some thoughts and maybe a counterpoint. My book was written purely in Word, and I just said insert photograph here. The publisher wanted to do its own formatting. Now I'm hearing kind of like a theme through all this is what makes a great word processor, formatter, whatever, for techies. And that has some value to it. But remember, the publisher doesn't give a damn. They just want either raw text in a Word document or something formatted that works for them. And the subtleties about, oh, well, Word doesn't do this. I'm learning InDesign right now, and I may end up just throwing it away because the publisher may not use InDesign. They have their own templates that they use internally. And so one has to understand, and in the, you talk about the questionnaires that publishers put out. In part of Springer's author's marketing questionnaire, they specifically say, unless you're doing it purely in LaTeX, which we do not encourage, because we're going to reformat it anyway, just give us raw text, all your attachments, and then we will throw it together in our own format. And that gives a unified look and feel for their entire line of publications. My book is one of, say, 150-ish books in their Space Library series. So I would advise, don't get too caught up on a particular platform for doing your writing, because that might be self-satisfying, but nobody cares that you're a techie when it hits the publisher.
Well, it depends, right? There are some projects where the format is part of the essence of the book.
Perhaps so. Now, if you're doing all self-publishing, all bets are off.
Yeah. Or books that have some artsy component, you want to be in charge of the formatting.
Yeah, and I haven't found too many artsy computer books.
Well, that's right.
No, I wasn't complaining about needing total control of the formatting. I was purely concerned with my experience. And I just find Word to be painful. That said, I was able to deliver PDF to all my publishers, and they were quite happy. They just told me what their specifications were. I generated PDF that matched their specifications. They didn't have to do any editing. In fact, they would pay me extra because I essentially did the job of something that they would have to contract out for. So yeah, I was happy doing it either way.
So you supply them with what they call camera ready copy, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's I would never feel confident doing that.
Yeah,
It's no big deal.
Yeah, okay. If you have an eye for that, that's fine, but I just don't. What else should we talk about?
I mean, how did you learn the very, very basics when you were about to like propose your first idea? Or like, how do you know that the money they're offering is even fair? How do you know when you're knowledgeable enough? Or how do you know that there aren't 6 other books about this topic in the works like that you don't know about yet?
Well, 6 other books about the topic in the works. You can sort of gauge that by scanning on Amazon. You know, you can't tell for sure, but you can tell what's already out there. And if there's a lot out there, and if you don't have an argument or at least a reasonable proposal that says this is why mine is different, then probably they're not going to pay attention to it. So if they're, you know, no, you don't know if there are books that are being prepared like yours. But if there aren't a lot of books that have already been written like yours, chances are yours has some uniqueness in the market.
So do you get a lot of back and forth from the publisher about this is the angle I'm thinking about pursuing, and they try to shape your vision? Is there a lot of negotiation financially and time-wise?
I haven't had much of that. In terms of financial negotiation, I belong to the Authors Guild, and if you belong to the Authors Guild, they have a free legal advisor who can look over the contract. I also have used an actual agent who looks over the contract and always negotiates better financial terms for me. Not significantly better, but better enough to make the agency worth their while. On the occasions when
That
I
makes sense. And that's after your proposal's been accepted.
no, I actually
Or
I contact the agent pretty quick. One of the original books that I did, not the very first, but you know, close to the first, I wrote a proposal, sent it to an agency, and they said, we don't like this proposal, but we like the writing style, so we'll get you in touch with the people in the For Dummies series. And so I already had an agent to begin with because they were shopping me around to that dummy series. And then I've just stuck with that same agent throughout the years. Now, if you don't have an agent, then I guess, I mean, there are lots of forums where you can get information about this. Again, I rely sometimes on information from the Authors Guild, but they're not strictly technical books As a matter of fact, they're hardly technical books. So they may be giving me bad advice. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? I don't know what I would do to negotiate if a recent book that I wrote with a co-author, we did not use an agent. And I think what we ended up just doing was sign on the dotted line and not fussing over the money. Anybody else have any?
Yeah, well, my experience was kind of similar to what you're describing. I had full-time jobs, so I wasn't writing for the money. And, I pretty much took what they offered, which after talking to friends who had written books, they all said the same thing, unless you're a really established author, just accept what they offer. It's going to be some standard rate.
Yeah, one of the things I look for in a contract is the author promises to defend and indemnify the publisher in case there are any problems. I see that in every contract, and I'm always interested in getting rid of that wording. Because essentially what that says is, if anyone is sued, then the big guy, the publisher who has lots of money and lots of resources, has nothing to do with it. And the little guy, you, the author, who has a mortgage to pay and a full-time job to do, is responsible for this $1 million suit. And so I try to get rid of those clauses. There are other things that my agent looks for.
Well, maybe I'm naive, but if you can't stand behind everything you've written, you probably shouldn't be writing a book.
I think that's naive. People are so litigious.
Yeah, well, I do carry a umbrella personal liability insurance for myself, so.
Yeah.
That's all really helpful. Thanks.
Spurred on by Frank plugging his book. There's
Oh, that's a good title. I mean, catchy, phrasing.
yeah, book one. Let's see this, and then I wrote this one, and then this was book I wrote about my own software.
Mm-hmm.
Funny story about that one is after it was out a year and it sold well, the publisher said, "Oh, it's time to start working on a second edition." And I said, "Well, the software hasn't changed, and I can vouch for that because it's my software. So there's no reason to change the book." And the publisher said, "Well, I know, but the way to get people to buy books is to make changes." So, it's totally annoying that the publisher thinks very differently than I do about the purpose of writing books.
And publishers aren't really tech savvy, most of them.
Well, this guy was. This was one of these O'Reilly books, the Nutshell series. They're almost as famous as the Dummies Guides, although I think marketed more towards computer professionals.
Right.
And it was Tim O'Reilly himself who was the editor for my book. So it was fun to work with him. He was very, very savvy.
Okay, yeah. Java changes often enough, so that writing a new edition is usually worth it for me. And I guess the other thing that I do when I write a new edition is I critique the work that I did before and want to improve on it. So with this latest edition of Java for Dummies, not only did I include a lot of new material, but I also looked at, say, chapter 13 and said, the way that I did chapter 13 before stinks. I want to fix it. And so for me, that was part of the rewriting. But I guess the surprise to me for new editions is they are still a lot of work. I've had the experience where I come in planning to change one word in chapter 10 and it ends up rippling backward toward chapter 1, everything has to be revised and changed and fixed and whatever. What else should we talk about? Anybody have experience working with co-authors?
Well, my first book was written with a co-author.
How did that work for you?
We had very different interests. Fortunately, we had one common one, and that kept us together. In the middle of the writing, we renegotiated the 50-50 split into something that was what each of us thought was more equitable, and that was a challenging time.
So which way did it go for you?
Well, I thought I was doing more of the work, and so we settled on a 60-40 split at the end. But for a while, I thought, oh, gee, maybe this is going to break up our friendship. And I've heard similar stories from other people, that actually worse stories, that they really did lose the friendship over their adventure with their co-author.
What did you do about coordinating styles with your co-author?
Well, one person had to ultimately enforce style, but it wasn't a big deal.
No?
No.
Okay, that's one of the concerns that I have with an Internet of Things book that I'm in the middle of, not in the Dummy series, is that his writing style is very, very different from mine, and neither of us are disciplined enough to match each other's style. So it's a lot of work trying to coordinate those styles and just agreeing on all the other elements that have to be somehow agreed upon.
Yeah.
I had another co-author that oh, never mind. Yeah, just never mind. This is good. Just, okay. I much prefer to. I prefer to work on my own. It feels better. I can make all my own decisions. And then when I get reviews back, which means that a technical reviewer says, hey, you shouldn't have written the code this way, and a copy editor says you should change this sentence, those are micro changes, and I'm kind of happy to review them and either accept them or not accept them.
A topic that's more interest to me regarding co-authors is finding co-authors, because I'm certainly aware of holes in my knowledge and how I could write many more books if I could only find other people to write the missing chapters that I'm ignorant about or incapable of writing authoritatively about.
So what about going to conferences and networking with people with similar interests?
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, but it's the number of people who can write well, have the time to write, are interested in collaborating. It's just vanishingly small.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, Don. Never thought about that. And just so you know, you said in a previous talk that you don't really check the chat. You have a question in there from Robert. Do you want me to read it, or are you going to check?
Let's see. How have sites like Stack Overflow, brain dumps affected your writing? When you say brain dumps, IT certification, I'm not sure what you mean. Robert, do you want to help with that?
Sure. Basically, for a lot of the IT certification processes, people would take the test, and they would write down the questions and they would post them on different sites. This is going back like into the late 90s. And people would use those as study guides for IT certifications for themselves. You know, it would eat it into the market, but it's also a way to basically almost like a crowdsourcing, I would think, from your perspective as a writer. Stack Overflow is the resource website for programmers. They usually post different questions and they get a number of responses and have a voting system to say these are probably the best ways to solve whatever you're trying to do. Some of them, a lot of them get into really advanced topics. Some of them are basic level items.
Well, again, I can answer that for myself, but let's see what other people have to say first.
Well, I certainly use sites like Stack Overflow myself. So yeah, it's a tremendous asset, whether you're a programmer or an author.
Yeah, I use them when I'm in a corner and want to know something. I don't use it proactively. I use it if, hey, I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know how I'm supposed to be doing it. I start poking around. And most of the time, I'm not even aware that I'm looking at Stack Overflow. I'm just at the top of my browser window and typing in a question and seeing where I land. And very often, I have to land on 3 or 4 different sites before I kind of congeal together an agreed upon answer to my question. I'm in the unfortunate position, and you know, here comes a confession, of writing a lot, but having very poor reading comprehension. So I don't do a lot of reading of other people's stuff. And it's a weakness on my part, a weakness that I seem to have gotten away with nicely. But what it means is that I'm not going to go out ahead of time and look for what is it that people want to know? What is it that people are saying about such and such? Now, being a college professor, I learn an awful lot about how to explain things and what the stumbling blocks are to understanding things by teaching college students day after day after day after day. So I have that advantage. But and writing in the For Dummies series means that that's the right level for me to be aiming at. You know, I'm hardly ever looking for what the latest expert advice is on such and such a topic. Yeah, I don't know. In other words, I use these resources mostly for rescue. Hey, I have to include information about such and such. I don't know anything about it. Let me look it up. And I mean, it goes without saying, you learn so much by writing about it and telling people about it. Here I am giving 4 talks at TCF today, and I remember when I was young and foolish and believed that you couldn't give a talk at a conference unless you knew everything about it and were a world famous expert. Not even close to the truth. I learn a lot when I write about things. I learn because and when I write about something, I say to myself, hey, I just wrote a sentence about that and it doesn't feel like I know what I'm talking about. Barry, be honest with yourself. Did you really understand what you just wrote? No. Let's go and investigate. Let's go study it until I get down a sentence that really feels genuine. And that happens to me all the time in teaching and writing.
Well, I will say a little of the opposite of what you just said, Barry, which is I like to read as widely as possible before I start doing any writing. And And that example of Stack Overflow is a good place. I read dummies guides copiously. I find them great source of information that I feel I should know before I do any writing or attempt to educate anyone else.
So there's this wide spectrum of what authors do. Very, very wide spectrum. And as a matter of fact, what I'm finding, by the way, is that different publishing companies do things radically differently. When I get into the groove of writing books for Wiley in the Dummy series, I think that all publishers work that same way. But now, right now, I'm dealing with two other publishers and having widely different experiences with both of them. Experiences that I don't expect. Hey, such and such a publisher, I expected it to go this way. Why is it not going that way? That's the way Wiley has always gone for me. And, you know, there's just a wide spectrum of stuff that goes on there. You know, if we tell you that it's a one size fits all story, you can tell just from our varied experiences that it's not. What have we got here? Is there anything that we must cover in the next 3 minutes that we haven't covered?
Is the length of material something that gets dictated to you?
Oh, that's a good point. They would prefer beforehand to have a detailed table of contents in which each section is specified and the number of pages of each section is specified so that they can add up the number of pages and figure out whether the pages are on the left or right side and how many extra pages that will add. And
Does
so
anyone ever guess correctly?
I'm awful at it.
No.
I tell them ahead of time. I'm confident enough with Widely now to tell them right at the start of every project, this is a guess. And it's not even a good guess. It's just my planning. Take it or leave it. And they're used to that. I'm sure there are other publishers. I had one editor who said, if you say the chapter is going to be 20 pages, I expect 20 pages, no more, no less. And I said to the company, get me a different editor. There's no way I could do that. I mean, some people can. Some people can do that. I'm incapable. But they all like that, I think. They all seem to like that level of planning.
I will mention that earlier I said that I was delivering camera-ready copy. And because of that, the publisher was more concerned not with the length of individual chapters, but the overall length of the book, because if it could be divisible by 16, I think it was, their printing presses would generate efficient use of modulo 16-page books. And if you had a book that had 16 plus 1, then it meant there would be 15 pages of white at the end, which just looks horrible. So
yeah, but they're pretty good at making adjustments to that when they see that happening. You know, when there's an orphan page or something like that, they figure out ways to squirrel things around. So,
well, like I said, I was generating camera-ready copy, so they didn't have that kind of flexibility at that point.
all right, folks, we are at the very, very end of this session. If you have questions for me, I'm barry@bird.org, and my name happens to be Barry Bird. What a coincidence. So please send me email if you like. And otherwise, I'll see you at the next session of TCF or future sessions of TCF, or who knows, one of these days in person at TCF. Coming. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
That's very good.